Bricks and minifigures are what LEGO does best, but for some reason, they've made stuff like headlamps, screwdrivers, and even body wash. So in this video, you're gonna see the most useless items LEGO's ever made, starting with the LEGO salt and pepper shakers. And I wanna be clear, this isn't just one product. Over the years, LEGO's released multiple different versions of these. There was a food and drink set in 2002, a gear item in 2006, and then a modern version which are 1x1 stud-shaped shakers scaled up about 600 times the size of a real one. They're not compatible with any LEGO sets, so you literally can't use them for anything but salt and pepper. And since LEGO's made so many of these, I guess they have to be selling a lot of them. But I can't say the same for this next one. Gear item 4277670 is the LEGO Egg Cup set, and it's exactly what it sounds like. 2 cups shaped like minifigure heads that you put an egg in. The lid is the top of the skull, which you can take off so you can actually reach the egg. It really feels like LEGO forgot their target audience when they made this thing. But this next item takes that meaning to a whole new level. For the most part, LEGO is very careful about not depicting alcohol in anything they make. But in 2008, someone greenlit gear item 851652, which is an official LEGO corkscrew and bottle opener with a brick as the handle. The only thing you use something like this on are wine bottles and champagne bottles, unless you just won the Super Bowl. So for them to actually release this is a pretty bold move. Now, this next item is pretty spot on with LEGO's audience, but I just can't imagine why anyone would ever buy it. I'm talking about a LEGO soap dispenser. We all know what these things are, so we also probably know how soap usually comes in its own bottle. You're telling me LEGO expects me to buy soap and pour it into a different bottle just because it's LEGO? No way, bro. That is so annoying. But at least the soap dispenser is something everyone could use. In the 1990s, LEGO released bath and shower foam as part of the Aquanauts theme, one of the deep-sea diving sub-themes from the Aquazone line. The soap came in bottles shaped like Aquanaut minifigures, which is actually pretty cool. But considering how far away LEGO is from the beauty industry, this just seems like a crazy purchase. Now, everything so far have all been one-off products, but LEGO's relationship with ice cube trays is something totally different. Right now, Bricklink has at least 5 separate official LEGO ice cube trays released across different years. There's the most recent brick-shaped tray from 2020, then a yellow ice brick tray from 2007, a minifigure-shaped tray from 2010, a LEGO Friends version in 2012, then a Legends of Chima version in 2013, and then a 1x2 brick tray from 2019. This is another one that makes absolutely no sense to me, but clearly I'm missing something because they just keep making them. They even made a tray for Belleville, the girls-oriented doll theme that ran from 1994 to 2009. This one is especially crazy because unless someone told you, you'd have literally no idea that this was made by LEGO. Look at the shapes. And this isn't the only time they basically skipped the branding part. In 2019, LEGO offered a free picnic blanket as a gift with purchase for orders over $200. But unless you see the logo in the corner, this thing just looks like any other picnic blanket. I mean, they could have at least put some minifigure patterns on it or something. Regardless, most of these items are completely random and won't get used very often. But if someone's buying a LEGO minifigure headlamp, they're gonna be using it all the time. The most famous one by far is the Batman headlamp that Brick Fanatics talked about in their article. But just like the ice cube trays, LEGO's made so many different versions of these. There's one with a regular minifigure, Harry Potter, Emmett from the Lego movie. They made so many that it would genuinely be too long to list. But then there are the zipper pullers from 2012. These are small rubber pieces shaped like bricks that you attach to a zipper and use to pull it instead of the zipper itself. Now, notice how I said shaped like bricks? Well, that's because they don't have the same dimensions as actual bricks, so the only thing you can use them for is to pull zippers. I think it'd be pretty cool if you could throw a rubber brick into something you build at home, but I guess LEGO just doesn't agree. Now, at some point in LEGO's history, there was a collab with Samsonite, the luggage company, and in 1978, they made set 7000-2, which is a brick-shaped suitcase with interior compartments specifically designed for storing LEGO bricks, but it was only sold in Canada. And this collab with Samsonite wasn't actually a collab at all. It was a legal mistake that gave Samsonite the rights to sell LEGO products in North America. And you're telling me they took this golden opportunity to sell luggage to Canada? Yeah, bro, this thing might as well not even exist. Anyways, in 2009, LEGO released the classic bookends. They're basically just a way to hold up books if you don't have a bookshelf. However, there was a pretty big problem with them. The bricks on these bookends are factory glued. You can't take them off no matter how hard you try. So if you wanted to decorate yours differently, you literally couldn't. This was a pretty good idea in 2009, since kids actually read books back then, but gluing the pieces completely killed it. And they might have done the same thing with the LEGO City coat rack. This thing also came out in 2009, and because of how rare it is, there's basically no information about it online. Just by looking at it though, it looks like the minifigs are glued in place. And if that's the case, this thing is a disgrace. Whoa, oh my god, whoa. Now, all of this stuff is pretty modern, but back in the 1950s and 60s, before LEGO really knew what they were doing, they were making some of the craziest and also coolest stuff ever. They had an entire line for smoking. I'm talking cigar boxes, lighters, matches, ashtrays, literally everything smoking. These are documented in the unofficial LEGO Sets and Parts Collector's Guide and confirmed by collectors who have found them over the years. Odds are these were made for employees back in the day, since LEGO's always been a toy company, but I'm calling them useless because I don't smoke, and you shouldn't either. Now, on the complete opposite end of the age range, in 1997, LEGO made set 1783, the Primo Ladybird Rattle. It's a two-piece baby rattle with LEGO Primo branding, made for kids aged 6 months and up. And the way most people got one was at a Jack-in-the-Box drive-thru, because apparently it came with one of the meals as a promotion. I guess this one isn't 100% useless. I just think it's crazy that LEGO collabed with Jack-in-the-Box and made a toy for a literal baby. But it's nowhere near as crazy as the Duplo Tulo screwdriver. Tulo is a Duplo sub-theme from back in the 90s, and instead of regular Duplo bricks, these ones had bolt mechanisms instead of standard studs. So LEGO was basically trying to teach kids about tools from really young. On its own, this is actually a really cool concept. The problem was that LEGO made you buy the screwdriver separately from everything else. It was super cheap, but making people buy it on its own is super confusing. However, it's not as confusing as the Dino Attack sand mold set from 2006. Dino Attack was a theme about people driving post-apocalyptic combat vehicles to fight off mutant dinosaurs in a ruined city, which is honestly kinda sick. This was a real LEGO theme that had regular LEGO stuff in it. And then one day, LEGO just decided to make these sand molds and throw them in the theme. But then in that same year, they released the Dino Attack chalk eggs, and somehow they make even less sense than the sand molds. Those look like dinosaurs, but these are basically Easter eggs that you can draw with on the sidewalk. I mean, it just makes no sense. The funniest part about both of these though is that they're technically in the gear theme. They're just using the Dino Attack name to try and get sales, which is a pretty weird theme to do that with. But one of the weirdest decisions has to do with the Homemaker theme. This theme launched in 1971, and it was LEGO's first major attempt at domestic playsets. Furniture, houses, kitchen, stuff like that. The problem is, the early sets in the line literally came with no figures. The most important part of the house was nowhere to be found. The instructions told parents to add dolls from other brands. LEGO didn't have a figure ready for these sets, so they outsourced it to whoever happened to make dolls at the time. They eventually invented the Maxi-Fig in 1974, which was made specifically for Homemaker, but it was basically just a stepping stone to the minifigure 4 years later, so we literally never saw it again. The weird decisions don't stop here though. In 2002, LEGO decided that Duplo, one of the most recognizable names in kids' toys, needed a rebrand, so they renamed it LEGO Explore. Parents who already had Duplo at home immediately started asking whether these were the same bricks, whether they were compatible, whether they needed to replace what they already had. They were overthinking literally everything, and rightfully so. I mean, why change a name as well known as Duplo? Sales absolutely plummeted after this because parents didn't realize Explore and Duplo were the same thing, so LEGO changed it back really fast. They were getting pretty bold in the early 2000s because this is also when they tried to compete with Hasbro and Mattel. At the time, these were two of the biggest toy companies ever, and LEGO tried to jump in by releasing 29 brick-built board games under the LEGO Games theme. The idea was that the games could be customized by rebuilding them, which is actually a pretty interesting idea. So interesting, in fact, that I got the Minotaur game when I was a kid, but apparently I was one of very few people who bought one, because most of them didn't sell. You could find them at 50 to 60% off pretty much everywhere, and the Batman and Helm's Deep games were canceled mid-development and never released because of how bad everything else did. Board games at least make some sense though. Robo Riders, on the other hand, absolutely did not. Robo Riders was a theme from the year 2000 that had robotic motorcycle minifigures. It basically bridged the gap between Slizers and Bionicle. Each Robo Rider came with a talisman wheel, which LEGO said had a unique power, and there were 16 of these wheels in total. But the problem was, LEGO never said what any of these powers actually did. Not in the sets, not on the website, not anywhere. As a result, the theme only ran for 1 year because literally nothing made any sense. But while Robo Riders left the story unfinished, Slizers managed to have 2 different stories at the same time. Slizers launched in 1999 in Europe, where all 8 robots lived on the same planet that had a bunch of different biomes. But in America, the exact same sets were released as Throwbots, and in that version, each robot lived on a completely separate planet with its own unique biome. So depending on where you lived, not only did these toys have different names, but the lore around them was different too, which again makes absolutely no sense. But the craziest item on this list is probably Modulex, which Godfred Christensen designed in 1963 as a completely separate brick system made for architects. The bricks were made for scale modeling at 1 to 20, and the early ones had LEGO printed on the studs. But later on, they got rid of the name and changed it to M because they thought the LEGO name was too childish for a professional product. The problem was, architects didn't buy it. Kjeldker Christensen, Godfred's son, told us what his dad was thinking. He thought this was ingenious, and this would really be changing the world. Then added, actually, it didn't really succeed that much. Eventually, it found its audience, and has been doing pretty well since then. But for a while, Modulex really couldn't have been more useless. But then there's LEGO Forma, which is probably the funniest LEGO story in recent years. In 2018, LEGO used a crowdfunding platform to launch a Technic koi fish set. They thought it'd be a waste of money, so they wanted fans to pay for it instead. As scummy as it is, it worked unbelievably well, and LEGO raised $1.4 million, which was 1,334% of the goal. Clearly, people wanted this Technic koi fish, and since LEGO had over 10 times the money they needed, they decided to go for it. Forma released, and AFOLs were generally pretty happy with it. But then, for some reason, LEGO just ended it. The theme only got 4 sets, and it didn't even last a year. This was something that fans clearly wanted, but this time, LEGO decided it was useless, not the fans. But which item in this video do you think is the most useless? Be sure to let me know down in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.